A line was drawn, and millions of lives changed overnight. No warning, no time to prepare, no way to go back. Homes were left behind, doors left open, memories frozen in time. People woke up one day, and suddenly they didn't belong where they had lived their entire lives. And the strangest part, many of them were walking towards something they had never even seen. No clear map, no guarantee of safety, no certainty of survival. Just a belief that somewhere ahead, a new beginning was waiting. But here's the mystery. What kind of idea becomes so powerful that people are willing to risk everything for it? What kind of dream spreads so deeply that it moves millions at once? And who turned that dream into a reality that changed the course of history forever? Because this is not just a story of a border. It's a story of decisions made in silence, of sacrifices made in darkness, and of a future built on faith alone. Before we go deeper, tell me, where are you watching this from, and what time is it in your city right now? Because what you are about to hear is not just history, it's one of the greatest untold mysteries of the modern world. Long before a line was drawn across the map, long before people were told where they belonged, this land was already alive with stories that stretched back thousands of years. The Indus River moved quietly through it all, not as just water, but as memory, as a witness to everything that had ever risen and fallen on its banks. Here, one of the earliest civilizations in human history had once existed. Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were not accidents of history. They were proof that this land had always been ahead of its time, with organized streets, carefully built homes, and a system that showed how people could live together with order and purpose. But history never stays still. Empires came and empires left. Persians moved through these lands, Greeks followed, warriors from Central Asia crossed mountains and deserts, each leaving behind something, a language, a custom, a memory, until the land itself became a mixture of many worlds. And then came a transformation that changed everything quietly, not through noise, but through connection. Islam arrived, not only through rulers, but through travelers, through teachers, through Sufi saints who did not carry swords, but carried words, words that reached hearts in villages and towns, words that slowly became part of daily life. Over time, faith became identity, and identity became something deeper than just belief. For centuries, this identity grew stronger, especially under powerful empires like the Mughals, when cities expanded, when culture flourished, and when people felt that their place in the world was secure. But even the strongest empires cannot escape time. The Mughal power began to weaken, and slowly, something new started rising in the distance. It did not arrive like an empire. It arrived like a business. The British, at first, they traded, they negotiated, they observed, and then they stayed. Trade became influence, influence became control, and control became rule. But this rule was different. It did not only change kings, it changed systems, education, language, power itself. And for many, especially Muslims of the subcontinent, this change felt like losing something they could not easily replace. Because once, they had been part of a ruling structure. Now, they were trying to find their place in a new system that did not belong to their past. Then came a moment that shook everything. The rebellion of 1857. For a brief time, it felt like history might turn back, like the old world might return. But when it failed, it did not just end a rebellion, it ended an era. The Mughal symbol disappeared. Power was gone, and what remained was silence, confusions, and a question that no one could ignore anymore. What happens to a people when their past no longer protects them? Some held on to memory, hoping things would return. Others realized nothing was going back. Among them was a man who saw the future clearly, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, who believed survival would not come from looking behind, but from preparing for what was ahead. He spoke about education, about understanding the new world, about rising again, not with emotion alone, but with knowledge. And slowly, a new awareness began to grow. People started to think differently, to ask new questions, to look at the future not as something fixed, but something uncertain. because the British would not rule forever. One day, they would leave, and when they did, who would decide the future? Who would hold power? Who would shape the system? For Muslims, this question carried a deeper weight, because they were not the majority everywhere. And in a system where numbers decide power, identity could slowly become weaker, not through force, but through decisions. At first, there was hope that everyone could move forward together. But hope alone does not solve fear, and slowly, that fear began to change into something else, a realization that identity, culture, and future could not be left unprotected. It was not yet a demand, not yet a movement, not yet a country, just a feeling, a quiet feeling that something important needed to be saved. It moved silently, through conversations, through classrooms, through thoughts that people could not fully explain, but they could feel it. And once a feeling like that begins to grow, it does not stay small for long, because somewhere, someone was about to give it words. Words that would not just describe the moment, but change the direction of history forever. That quiet feeling did not stay hidden for long, because once a question enters the heart of a people, it begins to search for someone who can give it meaning, not just words, but direction, not just emotion, but purpose. And in a time when confusion was growing, when the past felt broken and the future felt uncertain, a voice began to rise, not from power, but from thought. Allama Muhammad Iqbal did not speak like a politician trying to win support. He spoke like someone who understood something deeper, something most people could feel but could not explain. He looked at a community that had lost confidence, and instead of reminding them only of their past, he reminded them of who they still were. He did not say, "You were great once." He said, "You are still capable of greatness." And that changed everything, because there is a difference between remembering strength and believing in it again. Iqbal's words did not move through systems. They moved through hearts, through students sitting in classrooms trying to understand their future, through young minds searching for meaning in a changing world, through people who had slowly begun to doubt themselves. His message was simple, but powerful. A nation does not rise through fear, it rises through self-respect. A people do not survive by holding on to memories alone, they survive by building a future. And slowly, something began to change. The same community that once felt uncertain started to feel aware. The same people who were asking questions began to see possibilities, because Iqbal did not give them a map. He gave them a vision that their identity was not something small, not something temporary, but something worth protecting. And as that vision spread, it began to take shape, not as a country yet, but as an idea that refused to disappear. But an idea alone cannot change history, because history does not move only through thoughts. It moves through action, it moves through strategy, it moves through someone who can stand in front of power and speak with clarity. And that is where another figure entered the story. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a man very different from Iqbal, not a poet, not someone who spoke in emotion, but someone who understood systems, law, and power. In the beginning, he believed in unity. He believed that different communities could share a future, that fairness and agreements could protect everyone. And for a time, that belief seemed possible. But slowly, reality began to change, because as political systems developed, as elections and representation became more important, a difficult truth became clear. In a system where numbers decide power, those with smaller numbers must depend on promises, and promises do not always last. Jinnah saw this clearly. He saw that, without strong protection, a community could slowly lose its voice, not through violence, but through decisions, through laws, through systems, through structures that appear fair, but do not feel equal. And that realization changed his path. He began to speak differently, not just about unity, but about identity, not just about cooperation, but about survival. Because for him, this was not about separation for the sake of division. This was about ensuring that a people could shape their own future. And slowly, his message began to spread. Through meetings, through discussions, through political gatherings where ordinary people came to listen, not always fully understanding the details, but feeling the weight of what was being said. because this was no longer just politics. This was about the future, about whether their children would grow up with a voice or without one. The Muslim League began to grow, not as a small group, but as a movement. Students became involved, families began to talk about it in their homes, newspapers carried the message further, and what was once a quiet concern started becoming a shared belief. But even then, nothing was certain, because not everyone agreed. There were still many who believed unity could work, who believed that one nation could exist without division, and for a time, it seemed like the future could go either way. That is what made this moment so powerful, because history was not decided yet. It was still open, still uncertain, still moving, and then came a moment that would change everything. The year 1940, a gathering in Lahore, a decision that turned an idea into a direction. The Lahore Resolution. For the first time, the demand was clear, that Muslim-majority regions should not remain dependent on a system where they could be overruled, but should have their own political space. This was not just a statement, it was a turning point, because once an idea becomes a demand, it cannot go back to being a thought. It begins to move forward. And after that moment, something shifted permanently. The word Pakistan, which had once been just a concept, began to feel real, not visible yet, but real enough to believe in, real enough to sacrifice for. But with that belief came something else, tension, because the closer this idea came to reality, the more difficult the situation became. Communities that had lived together for generations began to see each other differently. Trust began to weaken, fear began to grow, and political decisions started carrying consequences that went far beyond speeches. Because now, this was no longer just about identity, it was about land, about borders, about where people would belong. And the truth is, no one fully understood what was coming. Not the leaders, not the people, not even those making the final decisions. Because drawing a line on a map is easy. But what happens after that line is drawn is something history never fully controls. And as time moved closer to the final moment, as independence became inevitable, as the British prepared to leave, the question was no longer whether change would happen. The question was how much it would cost, because a dream that had grown slowly over decades was now standing at the edge of reality. And reality was about to test everything, because very soon, people would not just believe in the dream, they would have to walk toward it, leave everything behind for it, risk everything for it, and discover whether what they were moving toward was worth what they were leaving behind. That moment finally arrived, not as a single event that people could prepare for calmly, but as a sudden shift in reality that moved faster than anyone expected, because after years of speeches, ideas, debates, and political struggle, the time had come when the future would no longer be discussed. It would be decided. The British Empire, which had ruled for so long, was preparing to leave, and once that decision became real, everything else began to move quickly. Too quickly, because when a powerful system collapses, it does not always leave behind order, it leaves behind urgency. Leaders met, plans were discussed, maps were studied, and somewhere in those decisions, a line began to take shape. A line that would divide land, divide cities, divide villages, and divide lives. But the people living on that land, they did not see that line clearly. They only heard about it in rumors, in whispers, in conversations that carried more fear than clarity, because no one could fully explain what it would mean. Would they stay? Would they leave? Would their home still be their home? Would tomorrow look like yesterday, or something completely different? And then the answers started coming, not slowly, not gently, but all at once, suddenly. People were being told where they belonged, and for many, that place was no longer where they had lived their entire lives. Homes that had stood for generations were no longer safe. Streets that had once been familiar began to feel uncertain. Neighbors who had shared moments together began to look at each other with hesitation. And in that confusion, one decision became unavoidable: leave or risk everything. So people started moving, not in small numbers, not in controlled groups, but in millions. Entire families packed whatever they could carry, not knowing how far they would travel, not knowing where they would stop, not knowing if they would even survive the journey. Because this was not migration by choice. This was movement driven by fear, by urgency, by the belief that staying behind might cost them everything. Some walked for miles, through heat, through dust, through exhaustion that slowly took away their strength. Some carried children in their arms, some supported the elderly, some held on to whatever little they could save from their past, and many carried something invisible, hope, a hope that somewhere ahead there would be a place where they could start again. But the journey was not simple, because when millions move at once, systems break, order disappears, and chaos begins to take over. Trains became the fastest way to move, but they also became symbols of uncertainty. People climbed onto them without tickets, without space, without knowing what waited at the other end. Some trains arrived full of life, filled with families who had survived the journey. Others arrived in silence, telling a story no one wanted to hear. And slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. This was not just independence. This was not just the birth of a country. This was a human tragedy unfolding in real time. Villages were left empty, homes were abandoned, doors remained open, as if the people who lived there would return the next day. But they never did, because once they crossed that invisible line, their past stayed behind. Some carried keys to houses they would never open again. Some carried photographs of people they would never see again. Some carried nothing, because they had already lost everything along the way. And yet, even in all this loss, people kept moving forward, because the dream was still alive. It had to be. Otherwise, none of this would make sense, because no one leaves everything behind for something they do not believe in. No one risks their life for something they think is meaningless. This dream had become stronger than fear, stronger than uncertainty, stronger than the past itself. And finally, in the middle of all this movement, all this confusion, all this pain, a new reality appeared, a country, Pakistan. It was no longer an idea, no longer a demand, no longer a possibility. It was real, on the map, in the world. But reality did not come with peace. It came with responsibility, because the moment Pakistan was born, it opened its eyes in the middle of crisis. Millions of refugees were arriving, with no homes, no resources, no system ready to receive them. Cities were overwhelmed, streets were crowded, and the new government had to function in conditions where almost nothing was prepared. There were not enough offices, not enough trained officials, not enough money, not enough time. Everything had to be built, while everything was still falling apart. Karachi became the first center of this new beginning, but it was not a calm capital. It was a city filled with movement, with arrivals, with people trying to find a place in a land they had never lived in before. Lahore, once a shared cultural city, became something else entirely, a place of loss and a place of rebuilding at the same time. Everywhere, people were starting again, from nothing. And this is where the story becomes deeper. Because countries are not built by leaders alone. They are built by people who refuse to give up, by families who rebuild homes, by workers who restart businesses, by students who continue studying even in difficult conditions, by mothers who keep families together when everything else is uncertain. These were not famous people, but they were the foundation. And while the world saw a new country appear, the people inside it were still trying to understand what had just happened. Because independence had come, but it had come with a cost no one could fully measure. And even as the new flag was raised, as celebrations took place in some places, there was also silence in others. Silence of loss, silence of memories left behind, silence of questions that had no answers. But there was also something else, a determination. Because despite everything, people believed this was only the beginning, that the suffering had meaning, that the dream was worth it, and that somehow this broken beginning would become something stronger. But the truth was, the hardest part had not even started yet. Because creating a country is one thing, keeping it alive is something else entirely. And very soon, That reality would begin to show itself, not through celebration, but through struggle, through decisions that would shape the future, through challenges that would test whether this dream could survive in the real world. Because now, there was no going back, only forward, into a future that no one could fully predict, but everyone had to face. The moment the celebrations ended and the noise of independence slowly faded into the background, a different kind of reality began to take shape across the newly created country, because while the world saw a nation being born, the people inside it were facing a question far more difficult than gaining freedom, and that question was whether this fragile beginning could survive the weight of everything that had been left unfinished. Because independence had come quickly, but stability required time, planning, unity, and systems that did not yet fully exist. The new state did not inherit a complete structure ready to function smoothly, because offices were incomplete, records were missing, experienced administrators were limited, and the sudden arrival of millions of refugees created pressure that no young country could easily handle, which meant that every decision carried urgency and every mistake carried consequences. And in this environment, the leadership had to build a functioning state while also responding to human suffering on a scale that history rarely sees. The emotional energy of independence was still present, but emotion alone could not feed families, organize institutions, or solve disputes between regions and communities, because once a country is created, people do not live inside speeches, they live inside systems, and those systems must provide food, shelter, security, justice, and opportunity, and when these things are uncertain, the dream that created the country begins to feel distant from the daily life of ordinary citizens. One of the earliest and most painful shocks came when Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the central figure who had led the movement and symbolized unity, passed away within a short time after independence, and this loss was not only the death of a leader but the removal of a guiding force at a moment when the country needed direction the most. Because Jinnah represented a bridge between vision and reality, and without him, that bridge suddenly felt incomplete. The responsibility of leadership moved to others, including Wat Ali Khan, who attempted to guide the country through its early struggles, but the challenges were too deep and too many, because the state still had to decide how power would be shared, how a constitution would be formed, how different regions would be represented, and how a balance would be created between Islamic identity and modern governance. And these questions were not simple technical problems, they were foundational decisions that would shape the character of the country for generations. The absence of a stable constitutional framework created uncertainty, because without clear rules, power often moves toward those who can control systems rather than those who represent the people, and this allowed bureaucracy and military structures to become stronger over time, not necessarily because they were planned to dominate, but because in moments of instability, organized institutions naturally fill the space left by weak political structures. At the same time, the geographical reality of the country added another layer of complexity, because Pakistan existed as two wings separated by a vast distance, with West Pakistan and East Pakistan connected not by land, but by the idea of a shared identity. And while this idea was powerful, it had to be supported by fairness, representation, and trust. Otherwise, the distance would not remain only physical, it would become political and emotional. East Pakistan carried a larger population, and this fact alone meant that in a purely democratic system it would hold significant political weight. But the centers of power, administration, and military influence were largely based in West Pakistan, creating a situation where numbers and power were not aligned. And this imbalance slowly created a feeling among many in East Pakistan that their voice was not being heard in proportion to their population. The issue of language became one of the earliest expressions of this tension, because for the people of East Pakistan, Bengali was not simply a medium of communication, it was a core part of their identity, their literature, their cultural pride, and their emotional connection to history. And when they felt that this identity was not being fully respected at the national level, it created a sense that the country they had helped create was not fully accepting them as equal partners. These tensions did not explode immediately, because in the early years the shared memory of independence and sacrifice still held the country together. But beneath that surface unity, unresolved questions were quietly growing, and history often moves in this way, where visible calm hides invisible pressure that continues to build until it reaches a point where it can no longer remain contained. During the 1950s, Pakistan struggled to establish a stable democratic system because political parties were still developing, leadership was changing, and institutions were not yet strong enough to manage disagreements effectively. And in such conditions, the idea of democracy remained present, but its practice became difficult, because democracy requires patience, trust, and continuity, and these qualities are hard to maintain in a country facing constant pressure. When Pakistan finally adopted its first constitution in 1956 and became the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, it was seen as a major step forward because it provided a formal structure for governance, identity, and representation. But this progress did not last long because political instability continued and the system did not have enough time to become strong before it was disrupted. In 1958, a turning point came when military rule was introduced under General Ayub Khan, and this marked the beginning of a new phase where the balance between civilian authority and military power shifted significantly, because the argument at that time was that the country needed order, discipline, and stability after years of political confusion, and many people initially accepted this change, believing that it would bring progress. Ayub Khan's period did bring visible development in certain areas, including infrastructure, industry, and economic planning, and cities began to grow while the state appeared more organized. But development that is not shared equally can create new problems, because when some regions and groups benefit more than others, it increases feelings of inequality and exclusion. This unequal development became especially important in East Pakistan, where many people felt that their region was not receiving its fair share of resources and attention, and when economic concerns combined with political and cultural grievances, the sense of dissatisfaction began to deepen, turning into a broader question about whether the unity of the country was based on equality or imbalance. The War of 1965 between Pakistan and India created a temporary sense of national unity, because external conflict often brings people together against a common threat. But this unity did not solve the internal issues, because once the immediate danger passed, the same unresolved questions returned with even greater intensity. By the late 1960s, public dissatisfaction with the existing system grew stronger, and movements began to emerge demanding change, participation, and accountability, because people who had accepted authority for the sake of stability were now asking for a voice in shaping their own future. And this shift showed that no system can remain unchallenged when people feel excluded from it. The elections of 1970 were a critical moment because they offered a chance for democratic representation on a large scale, and the results clearly showed the political strength of East Pakistan through the victory of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's party. But instead of leading to a smooth transfer of power, the situation became complicated and delayed, creating frustration that quickly turned into anger. This was the moment when the gap between East and West Pakistan became impossible to ignore, because when a democratic result is not respected, it sends a message that the system does not treat all participants equally, and for many in East Pakistan, this confirmed their fear that their voice would not be allowed to shape the country's future despite their majority. The events that followed moved rapidly toward conflict, because negotiations failed, tensions increased, and the situation escalated into violence and eventually war. And by 1971, Pakistan faced one of the most painful moments in its history when East Pakistan separated and became Bangladesh, breaking the country into two and leaving behind a deep emotional and political wound. This separation was not just a loss of territory, it was a loss of a part of the original vision, and it forced the country to confront difficult truths about unity, governance, and the importance of justice, because a nation cannot remain united if its people do not feel equally respected and represented. After 1971, Pakistan entered a period of rebuilding and reflection because the country had to redefine itself after such a major loss, and under new leadership, efforts were made to create a stronger constitutional framework, leading to the 1973 Constitution, which aimed to establish a more balanced system of governance. However, the struggle between different forms of power did not end, because the tension between civilian leadership and military influence continued, and political instability remained a recurring theme, showing that the challenge of building a stable and fair system was far more complex than achieving independence. In the years that followed, Pakistan also became involved in regional and global conflicts, including the Soviet-Afghan War, which brought both strategic importance and internal challenges as the country dealt with the effects of war, migration, and shifting alliances, adding another layer to its already complex history. The development of nuclear capability later became a symbol of strength and security, reflecting the country's determination to protect itself in a challenging region. But this also highlighted a deeper reality, that true strength is not only measured by military power, but by the ability to provide stability, justice, and opportunity for the people. Through all these changes, one thing remained constant: the resilience of the people. Because despite political shifts, economic challenges, and social pressures, ordinary citizens continued to build their lives, educate their children, and contribute to the country in ways that are often not recorded in history books. This is what makes this chapter so important, because it shows that survival after independence required more than courage. It required patience, adaptation, and the ability to learn from mistakes. And while the journey was not smooth, it proved that the dream that created the country was strong enough to endure even the most difficult tests. But even after surviving these challenges, the story was far from complete, because the world itself was changing, and new pressures, new opportunities, and new questions were emerging that would shape the future in ways no one could fully predict. And as the country moved into a new era, it faced a different kind of challenge, not just survival, but transformation, because the next chapter would not only be about what had happened, but about what could still happen if the dream was given a new direction in a rapidly changing world. After surviving wars, political instability, separation, and repeated cycles of crisis, Pakistan did not disappear, it did not collapse, and it did not lose its place on the map, but survival, no matter how difficult, was no longer the biggest challenge, because as the world moved into a new century, the question was no longer whether the country could exist, but whether it could truly progress, because a nation that only survives remains trapped in its past, while a nation that evolves begins to shape its future. The world itself had changed in ways that earlier generations could not have imagined, because power was no longer defined only by land, armies, or borders, but by knowledge, technology, economy, and the ability to compete globally. And this meant that Pakistan was no longer only facing internal struggles or regional conflicts. It was now part of a global system where nations rise or fall based on how they prepare their people for the future. At the center of this transformation stood one powerful reality. Pakistan had become one of the youngest nations in terms of population, with millions of young people entering adulthood carrying expectations, ambitions, and questions that could not be answered by history alone. Because they were not living in 1947, they were living in a world of internet, digital work, global competition, and rapidly changing opportunities. This generation had heard the stories of sacrifice, migration, and struggle, but their lives were shaped by a different pressure, the pressure to build something meaningful in a system that often felt uncertain. Because while the dream of Pakistan was built on dignity and identity, the reality they faced included unemployment, economic instability, rising costs, and a system that did not always reward effort fairly. Education became the most important foundation in this new era, because without it, no country can compete in the modern world. And while Pakistan has produced brilliant minds, talented individuals, and successful professionals, the system itself has struggled to provide equal quality education to all, creating a gap where some move forward rapidly while others remain stuck in cycles of limitation. In cities, universities and private institutions offer opportunities, but in many rural areas, schools lack resources, teachers and infrastructure, and this imbalance creates a silent divide within the nation, because when millions of children do not receive strong education, the country loses not only potential workers, but potential thinkers, leaders and innovators who could have changed its direction. Yet despite these limitations, the desire to learn remains strong, because students continue to study under difficult conditions, sometimes without electricity, sometimes without proper facilities, but with determination that reflects something deeper than comfort. It reflects belief, because when someone studies despite hardship, they are not just preparing for exams, they are trying to rewrite their future. Alongside education, the economy became another defining challenge, because no matter how strong a nation's identity may be, daily life depends on financial stability, and when people struggle to meet basic needs, the larger vision of the country begins to feel distant, because survival at the household level becomes more urgent than national dreams. Pakistan's economy has experienced cycles of growth and crisis, often influenced by political instability, global pressures, debt, and structural weaknesses, and this creates a pattern where progress is made, then slowed, then restarted, preventing long-term stability from taking firm root. And when stability is uncertain, investment, growth, and opportunity also become uncertain. For ordinary citizens, this translates into a life where planning becomes difficult, because rising prices, job insecurity, and limited opportunities create stress that affects families, decisions, and future hopes. And when economic pressure continues for long periods, it does not only impact income, it impacts confidence, because people begin to question whether effort will lead to improvement. Despite this, the resilience of the people continues to stand out, because small businesses open in crowded markets, entrepreneurs build startups with limited resources, farmers continue working under unpredictable conditions, and millions of Pakistanis working abroad send money back home, supporting families and strengthening the economy in ways that are often overlooked. The rise of technology introduced a new dimension, because the internet created opportunities that did not depend entirely on traditional systems, allowing young people to learn skills, work online, and connect with global markets. And this shift has quietly transformed many lives, especially for freelancers, content creators, and digital entrepreneurs who have found ways to succeed beyond local limitations. This digital shift represents one of the most promising aspects of Pakistan's future, because it allows talent to move beyond borders, but it also requires support in the form of education, infrastructure, and policies that encourage innovation, because without these, the potential of the digital economy remains limited. Another important aspect of the modern era is the role of women, because no nation can reach its full potential if half of its population is restricted. And while Pakistani women have made progress in education, professions, and public life, many still face challenges that limit their opportunities, and overcoming these barriers is essential not only for fairness, but for national growth. When women are educated, supported, and given opportunities, the impact extends beyond individuals. It strengthens families, improves health outcomes, increases economic participation, and contributes to social stability, making it clear that empowering women is not a separate issue, it is central to the future of the country. At the same time, climate change has emerged as a serious threat, because Pakistan's geography makes it vulnerable to floods, droughts, and extreme weather, and recent years have shown how environmental changes can affect millions of lives, damaging homes, agriculture, and infrastructure, and creating challenges that require long-term planning and global cooperation. The Indus River, which once supported ancient civilizations, now stands as a reminder of both opportunity and risk, because water management, environmental protection, and sustainable development are no longer optional concerns, they are essential for survival in the modern world. On the global stage, Pakistan continues to navigate complex relationships, balancing regional tensions, international expectations, and internal priorities. And while it has played significant roles in global events, the challenge remains to build a stable and positive image that reflects not only its strategic importance, but also its cultural richness and human potential. Inside the country, culture continues to thrive because music, art, literature, sports, and traditions provide a sense of identity and continuity, reminding people that beyond political and economic struggles, there is a shared heritage that connects them. Cricket, in particular, has become a unifying force, bringing people together across differences, showing that despite challenges, there are moments when the nation can feel united, even if temporarily, and these moments reveal the emotional strength that still exists within the population. Yet unity during celebrations must translate into unity in daily life, because the real strength of a nation is measured not in moments of excitement, but in its ability to work together through challenges, respecting diversity while building a shared future. The diversity of Pakistan remains both a strength and a challenge, because multiple languages, cultures, and regions create richness, but also require careful management to ensure fairness, inclusion, and equal opportunity, because without these, differences can turn into divisions. For Pakistan to move forward, it must build trust between its people and its institutions, because trust is the foundation of stability, and without it, even strong systems struggle to function effectively, and building trust requires transparency, accountability, and consistent effort over time. The younger generation plays a crucial role in this process because they are not only inheriting the country, they are shaping it, and their choices, whether in education, work, politics, or social engagement, will determine the direction of the future. This generation is more connected to the world than any before it, and this exposure brings both opportunities and challenges, because while it allows for learning and growth, it also creates comparisons and expectations that can increase pressure, making it important to balance ambition with realistic progress. Pakistan's journey in the modern era is therefore not defined by a single issue, but by a combination of factors including economic development, education, governance, social change, and global integration, all of which must move forward together to create lasting progress. The dream that created Pakistan was powerful enough to bring a country into existence. But sustaining that dream requires continuous effort, adaptation, and commitment, because history provides inspiration, but the future requires action. This chapter shows that the story of Pakistan is not only about what has happened, but about what is still possible, because every challenge also carries the potential for change, and every difficulty also creates an opportunity for growth, if it is approached with determination and clarity. As the country continues to move forward, the focus shifts from survival to development, from identity to opportunity, and from memory to progress, because while the past shapes the present, it is the choices of today that will define tomorrow. And as this journey continues, a deeper realization begins to form that beyond all systems, policies, and structures, the true strength of Pakistan lies in its people, their resilience, their determination, and their ability to continue moving forward despite challenges. This understanding leads to the next stage of the story, where the focus moves from systems and structures to the human side of the nation, to the lives, emotions, and everyday experiences that define what it truly means to belong to this country. Because in the end, a nation is not just built by history, it is lived by its people, and their stories carry the real meaning of everything that has come before and everything that is yet to come. After everything that had been built, broken, rebuilt, and tested across decades, one truth slowly became clearer than any political argument or historical event, and that truth was that Pakistan does not live only in its borders, its institutions, or its headlines. It lives in its people, in their daily lives, in their quiet struggles, in their small victories, and in the invisible strength that keeps the country moving forward even when everything around them feels uncertain. Because when you step away from maps, speeches, and history books, and you look closely at the life of an ordinary person, you begin to see a different version of the story, a version that is not always told, but is always present, a version where a father wakes up before sunrise, not because he is certain of success, but because he cannot afford to give up, where a mother holds her family together with patience that is never recorded, where a student studies late into the night with limited resources, not because it is easy, but because it feels like the only path forward. These are not moments that appear in official records, but they are the foundation of the country, because nations are not carried forward by events alone, they are carried forward by people who continue to live, work, and hope, even when conditions are difficult, and this quiet determination is one of the most powerful but least visible forces in Pakistan's story. In villages, life moves at a different pace, but the challenges are just as real, because farmers depend on land, weather, and water that do not always cooperate, and yet they continue planting season after season, trusting that effort will eventually lead to reward, even when uncertainty is part of every harvest. And this relationship with the land reflects a deeper connection between people and survival that has existed for generations. In cities, the rhythm is faster, but the pressure is heavier, because millions of people move through crowded streets, balancing work, family, and responsibility, trying to create stability in an environment where competition is high and resources are limited. And despite these pressures, life continues, markets open, businesses operate, schools function, and people adapt in ways that are both creative and resilient. The youth stand at the center of this reality because they are both the most hopeful and the most pressured generation, carrying expectations from their families, from society, and from themselves, trying to succeed in a system that does not always make success simple, and yet they continue searching for opportunities, learning new skills, exploring digital platforms, and finding ways to move forward even when the path is not clearly defined. Many of them face moments of doubt, because when effort does not immediately lead to results, it becomes easy to question whether the system is fair, whether opportunities are equal, and whether the future will reward their struggle. And this emotional pressure is one of the most significant challenges of the modern era, because it affects not only actions but belief itself. But even in these moments of doubt, something remains, a quiet refusal to stop, a belief that change is possible even if it is slow, even if it requires patience. And this belief is what keeps individuals moving forward, one step at a time, even when the destination is not fully visible. Women play an essential role in this silent strength, because their contributions often extend beyond visible recognition, shaping families, education, health, and social stability in ways that define the future of entire communities. And as more women enter education and professional fields, their impact continues to grow, creating a shift that has the potential to transform society from within. At the same time, many women continue to face barriers that limit their opportunities, and addressing these challenges is not only a matter of fairness, but a necessity for national progress, because when talent is restricted, the entire country loses potential, and when it is supported, the entire country benefits. Beyond individual lives, there is also a collective emotional connection that defines Pakistan, a connection that appears in moments of unity, in times of celebration, and in times of crisis, when people come together not because they are told to, but because they feel a shared responsibility toward each other. And this emotional bond is one of the strongest forces holding the nation together. This connection becomes visible in unexpected ways, in the way people support each other during natural disasters, in the way communities rebuild after loss, in the way strangers help strangers without expectation, and in the way hope continues to exist even after difficult moments, showing that resilience is not only an individual quality, but a collective one. The role of overseas Pakistanis adds another dimension to this story, because millions live far from their homeland, working in different countries, building lives in unfamiliar environments, and yet remaining connected through memory, responsibility, and emotional attachment, sending support back home and carrying the identity of Pakistan with them wherever they go. Their journey reflects both opportunity and sacrifice, because while they may find stability abroad, they also experience distance from family, culture, and home, and this balance between gain and loss is a quiet part of the national story that often goes unnoticed, even though it affects millions of lives. Cultural expression also plays a powerful role in shaping identity, because music, poetry, art, and storytelling allow people to connect with their history and emotions in ways that politics cannot. And through these forms, the deeper spirit of the country continues to be expressed, preserved, and shared across generations. Sports, especially cricket, create moments where differences temporarily fade, and a shared sense of belonging emerges, reminding people that despite challenges, there is still a collective identity that can unite them, even if only for a moment. And these moments reveal the emotional potential that exists within the population. However, the true strength of unity is tested not in moments of celebration, but in moments of difficulty, where differences must be managed, respected, and balanced to create a stable society, and this requires effort, understanding, and a willingness to look beyond individual perspectives toward a shared future. One of the deeper challenges that remains is the relationship between citizens and institutions, because trust is built slowly but can be lost quickly, and when people feel disconnected from systems meant to serve them, it creates frustration that can weaken the overall stability of the country, making it essential to build systems that are transparent, accountable, and fair. Justice, in particular, plays a central role in this relationship, because without it, equality becomes uncertain, and when people do not feel protected by the law, they begin to rely on alternatives that may not be consistent or fair, creating a cycle that is difficult to break without long-term reform and commitment. Healthcare, education, and social support systems also reflect the reality of how a country functions, because they directly impact the quality of life for millions of people, and improving these areas is essential not only for development, but for maintaining the dignity and well-being of citizens. Mental health has become an increasingly important topic, especially among younger generations, because modern pressures, combined with traditional expectations, create challenges that are not always visible, and addressing these issues requires awareness, support, and a shift in how society understands emotional well-being. Despite all these challenges, the ability of people to continue moving forward remains one of the most defining features of Pakistan, because resilience is not only about surviving major events, it is about continuing daily life with determination, even when circumstances are difficult, and this resilience forms the backbone of the country's ongoing story. The future of Pakistan, therefore, does not depend only on policies or leadership. It depends on how individuals see themselves within the larger picture, whether they feel connected to the nation, whether they believe their efforts matter, and whether they are willing to contribute to a shared vision of progress. This sense of belonging is what transforms a population into a nation, because when people feel that they are part of something larger than themselves, they begin to act not only for personal benefit, but for collective growth, creating a cycle of improvement that strengthens the entire system. As this chapter unfolds, it becomes clear that the story of Pakistan is not finished. It is still being written every day, not only in major events, but in small actions, decisions, and efforts that may not seem significant individually, but together shape the direction of the future. And as the focus shifts from systems to people, from history to experience, and from past to present, a deeper understanding begins to form that the true measure of a nation is not only what it has achieved, but what its people continue to believe is possible. Because in the end, the strength of Pakistan lies not only in its past or its structure, but in the hearts of its people, in their willingness to continue to adapt and to hope, even when the path ahead is uncertain. And it is this human story that leads naturally into the final part of the journey, where everything comes together, not as a conclusion, but as a realization of what this dream truly means. After everything that has been seen, after every rise and fall, after every moment of hope and every moment of doubt, one truth stands stronger than anything else. And that truth is that Pakistan was never just an event in history. It was never just a result of politics, and it was never meant to remain only a memory of 1947, because from the very beginning, it was something deeper, something unfinished, something that would continue to evolve long after the moment of its creation. Because when a nation is born from a dream, that dream does not end the day the flag is raised. It begins, it takes a new form, it moves from imagination into responsibility, and it becomes something that each generation must carry forward, not with the same struggles, but with new challenges that reflect the time they live in. And this is where the story of Pakistan becomes different from what many people expect. Because it is not a closed chapter, it is an ongoing journey. The first generation carried the weight of sacrifice. They left homes, they crossed borders, they faced uncertainty, and they built a country from almost nothing. And their success was survival, because they proved that a dream could become real, even when the world doubted it, even when the cost was beyond imagination. And that alone is one of the most powerful achievements in modern history. The second generation inherited a country that existed but was unstable, and their challenge was to protect it, to hold it together through political struggles, wars, internal conflicts, and moments when the future felt uncertain. And their success was continuity, because they ensured that despite everything, the country did not disappear, that the system, even when imperfect, continued to function. The third generation grew up in a world where the country was established, but the expectations were different, because now the question was not only survival or stability, but progress. And their challenge was to build institutions, strengthen the economy, and create opportunities that could improve the quality of life. And their success remains incomplete, because while progress has been made, the journey is still ongoing. And now the current generation stands at a point where all these histories meet, where sacrifice, survival, and struggle are no longer stories to remember, but foundations to build upon. And their challenge is the most complex of all, because they must transform the country, not just protect it, not just maintain it, but elevate it to a level where the dream is no longer only emotional, but practical, visible, and experienced in everyday life. This generation is living in a world that moves faster than ever before, where change does not wait, where competition is global, where knowledge is constantly evolving, and where the difference between progress and stagnation can be determined by how quickly a society adapts. And this means that the future of Pakistan depends on how well it prepares its people to meet these new realities. Education, innovation, technology, and governance are no longer optional improvements, they are necessities, and without them, even a nation with strong identity and history can fall behind. Because the modern world rewards those who invest in knowledge, who support creativity, and who build systems that allow talent to grow. But beyond systems and policies, there is something even more important: belief. Because no nation can rise if its people do not believe in its future. And belief is not created by words alone. It is created by experience, by seeing fairness, by feeling opportunity, and by knowing that effort will lead to progress. This is where the real test of the dream begins, because the dream of Pakistan was built on dignity, on identity, and on the idea that people should have the right to shape their own future. And if that right is not felt in daily life, if people feel disconnected from opportunity, from justice, from growth, then the dream begins to lose its strength, not because it was wrong, but because it has not yet been fully realized. The challenge, therefore, is not to question the dream, but to complete it, to take it beyond its origin and into its purpose, to transform it from a moment in history into a living reality that can be seen in schools that educate effectively, in hospitals that treat fairly, in institutions that act honestly, and in a society where people feel respected, regardless of their background. Unity becomes essential in this process, because a nation divided within cannot progress outward, and unity does not mean uniformity. It means respect. It means understanding that diversity is not a weakness but a strength, and that different languages, cultures, and perspectives can exist together without conflict if there is a shared commitment to fairness and cooperation. The responsibility for this transformation does not belong to one group alone, it belongs to everyone, because nations are not changed only by leaders, they are changed by citizens, by their choices, their actions, their willingness to contribute, and their refusal to accept limitations that can be overcome. Every student who chooses to learn despite difficulty is contributing to the future. Every worker who performs their duty with honesty is strengthening the system. Every individual who treats others with fairness is building trust. And every effort, no matter how small it may seem, becomes part of a larger movement toward progress. This is the unseen side of national development, the side that does not appear in headlines, but determines the direction of the country over time. Because when enough individuals move in the same direction, even slowly, change becomes inevitable. The role of leadership remains important because leaders shape policies, create frameworks, and guide decisions. But even the best leadership cannot succeed without public participation, because progress requires alignment between those who govern and those who are governed, and without that alignment, efforts remain incomplete. Global challenges will continue to affect Pakistan, whether through economic pressures, environmental changes, or geopolitical dynamics, but these challenges are not unique. Every nation faces them, and what separates success from failure is not the absence of problems, but the ability to respond effectively. Pakistan's position in the world gives it both challenges and opportunities, because its geography connects regions, its population provides energy, and its history offers lessons. And if these elements are used wisely, they can become strengths that support long-term growth. The cultural richness of Pakistan also plays a role in shaping its identity, because art, literature, music, and traditions connect people to their roots while allowing them to express their experiences, and this balance between tradition and modernity is essential for creating a society that respects its past while embracing its future. The question that now stands before the nation is not whether it can survive, because it has already answered that question many times. The question is whether it can rise to its full potential, whether it can turn its challenges into opportunities, and whether it can create a future that matches the strength of the dream that created it. This question does not have a simple answer, because it depends on continuous effort, on learning from mistakes, on adapting to change, and on maintaining a vision that goes beyond immediate concerns, focusing instead on long-term progress. Every generation has the ability to redefine the path, to make choices that bring the country closer to its goals, and to build on what has already been achieved. And this means that the future is not fixed. It is shaped by decisions made in the present. As this chapter reaches its final moments, it becomes clear that the story of Pakistan is not about perfection. It is about persistence, not about avoiding challenges, but about facing them, and not about reaching a final destination, but about continuing the journey with purpose and determination. Because in the end, Pakistan is not just a place, it is not just a history, and it is not just a dream that once existed. It is a living idea, one that continues to evolve, one that continues to be tested, and one that continues to offer the possibility of something greater. And that is the most important realization of all, that the dream that created Pakistan did not end with its creation. It continues in every effort to improve, in every step toward progress, and in every moment where people choose to believe that the future can be better than the past. Because a nation born from a dream does not remain in the past. It moves forward, carried by those who are willing to turn that dream into reality, not once, but again and again, until it becomes everything it was meant to be. So this was not just a story about a country. It was a story about a dream that began in silence, grew through struggle, and survived against everything that tried to stop it. A dream carried by people who had nothing but belief. A dream that asked for sacrifice and received it without hesitation. And even today, that dream is still alive, not in books, not in speeches, but in the lives of millions who wake up every day trying to make something better, not just for themselves, but for the future. Because Pakistan was never meant to be perfect, it was meant to be built again and again by every generation that refuses to give up. So the real question is not, what did Pakistan achieve? The real question is, what will you help it become? Because this story is not finished, and the next chapter is being written right now. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "A nation born from a dream fest," and tell me, which country's untold story should we explore next? Because every nation has a history, but some stories are still waiting to be told.